Hello guys, Jama here and welcome to my Concept Art for Films course. Let me quickly guide you through the structure of this course. As you know, it's a 5-week online course, which means every Monday I will be releasing a video covering certain topics and you will have the rest of the week to work on your assignment. What's gonna happen in between? In between, we're gonna have our Discord channels. Basically, Discord channels will recreate a class environment for us. You guys will be there having your group of students, and then you will be sharing your work, asking questions, uh, throwing different ideas, and other students will help you. I will be there constantly checking out and seeing what's your work in progress, giving you some tips, doing a little paint overs, and basically like interacting with you, just exactly as you would expect it in the real class, but as an online version of it. At the end of the week, we will have a feedback session. It's where we gather every student, all the students together, and I will be giving you feedback live. I will open your work, uh, do some little paint overs, try to help you as much as I can. But being that we're gonna be doing that as a class environment, which means again you will be. I definitely strongly encourage you to stay there for the whole time uh, if you have time, because you can learn a lot by just watching other just by watching my feedback to other students as well. Also, as you know, this class is being offered in 3 levels, and this is exactly what I kind of was struggling with previously with in my teaching experiences, where it's very difficult to make a course that will benefit equally everybody, right? Just because you have artists and students with such a different skill levels, different amount of experience. So for some people it becomes too tough, for some people it becomes too easy. In order to avoid that, I broke it down in 3 levels, and hopefully that will allow me to that will allow me and students to stay very focused and be involved as much as we can. Before we move on, I wanted to talk a little bit about my own journey to concept art for films. As many of you might already know, I'm coming from a little country called Tajikistan. And that for me meant, like, for example, I had no industry in my country. But what happened when I was a kid, and I think I was around 6 years old or so, I saw this movie called Terminator, and I was mind blown. I was like, damn, this is so cool. Obviously, as a kid, like when you watch movies, they become like your iconic movies. Well, fair enough, Terminator is still an iconic movie, but when I saw it as a kid, I was mind blown, and I was like, day after day, I was dreaming about this movie, started doing little drawings and stuff like that. I was so into it that there's this little funny story where I really wanted to look like Terminator. So what I did, I asked my mom if she could take me to a hairdresser, and if they can basically cut my hair as Terminator haircut, right? So this is what happened. This is me. This is little Jama with my Terminator haircut, which didn't turn out exactly like that. I was crying and I was like really upset about it. But it just kind of like shows you how like I got inspired by the movies as I was a kid, and this is maybe what most of you guys had when you were younger. But I struggled a lot because, again, as I mentioned, being like we were a part of Soviet Union, which collapsed in 90s, early 90s, and that basically resulted in having like complete chaos in our country. We had civil war, we had really tough times, and at the end, it happened in a way like I I took another path. I became an aerospace engineer, which was completely unrelated to concept art or anything related to art. It was more engineering driven. It was more like physics, math heavy profession, which in the end I didn't want to do. I really was like, damn, this is cool, but I really want to go back to what I was inspired by when I was a kid, which was movies, which was drawing, design, and all that stuff. So from there, it took me, I would easily say, another 10 years to get where I am right now. But I think what was important for me, because I had a late start, I was able to analyze certain things and approach certain things differently instead of just trying to like do random things. I had to structure my studies. I had to structure my goals because I knew I'm a late starter and I need to be more efficient with my time and with my studies and with whatever I was doing, right? That's the reason our first chapter would be actually understanding what is film industry is about, because there's so many things that we do in film industry as concept artists. And if you don't know exactly what you like, or you don't know exactly what you should be expecting, it would be difficult for you to try to learn and try to level up your skills to enter to the film industry. So basically, like if I draw a very simple diagram here, so I'm gonna bring up this Photoshop file here. So this is the film industry, right? And first, you really need to understand where you are. That's why we had levels, right? For example, for beginner level, I thought it's somebody over here, right? So that's you. So basically, this means you have some art experience, you like know your fundamentals, and but you never had an experience working in the film industry, right? You're trying to find your way out, right? So you're moving towards here. Then another level would be intermediate, right? So it's like you're probably coming from a different industry, right? But which still has some common ideas with film industry, right? Let's say, for example, you're coming from game, right? Which basically means like you know composition, you know like design, but obviously you never worked in film industry. Or you worked in the film industry, but like somewhere here, right? For example, like this. Let's say you work as a matte painter and you want to become a concept artist. So how do you move forward, right? What do you need to learn and all that stuff? And then obviously for professionals, mostly like you just have more overlap. Again, you may be working in the industry already, or you're working in like, for example, somewhere here, right? Once you kind of figure out where exactly you are, it's a very important thing to do, you know. That's the reason, again, I said that's the reason why I created those levels, right? Because sometimes you're starting out and you don't know exactly where you are, and then on top of that you don't know exactly where you're going, and that could be a very inefficient way of doing things. And this is exactly where, when I started out, which I consider myself somewhere here, right? Like that was me. Like I was far away, I didn't have any industry around me, I didn't know exactly how industry works, but I knew exactly where I am, which was the first question. And then I approximately knew, or at least I knew where I want to be. And then obviously wasn't exactly like this. This was a very bumpy road like this. But in the end, I got into it, right? So yeah, this is kind of the basic idea behind this first chapter of this first class. Let's go back to our presentation here. So film industry, right? If we break down, like in order for us to understand this industry, we need to break it down. Otherwise it becomes very vague, very kind of very common thing. Oh, I want to enter film industry. You need to kind of understand what this film industry is made of, right? And I broke it down into very simple steps, which is pre-production, post-production, production, and post-production. So we're gonna go through each one of those, and I will explain you what type of work we do at every stage, and that will really help you to kind of put this industry together in your mind. So pre-production. What do we do in pre-production? Basically, pre-production is when they're just starting out making this movie. Again, pre-production has as well different stages, like early pre-production and stuff like that. But within pre-production, it's basically you are at the beginning of the whole movie, right? You're coming up with ideas, you're trying to solve different design issues and stuff like that. It's a very cool phase, and this is where I see most of concept artists like wanting to get into, right? To be able to inspire the movie to come up with the ideas that later on will be on the big screen. So within pre-production, there are like, again, I divided them into like simple categories. So story beats or keyframes, right? What do we mean by when we say story beats or keyframes? So basically, it's when director comes to you and or production designer comes to you and they want to illustrate specific moments in the movie, right? And being that early in pre-production, often you don't have any design sorted out yet, right? It's all about story beat, like story elements. That's why it's always like how much you know about like storytelling at this point, and less about design, right? You can occasionally like come up with some designs, but most of the time they got reworked later on because you will have like a proper design stage for those. For example, this is a little moment I did for like story beat moment I did for Jurassic World, and as you can see, in terms of like the execution and the tools that I use, it's very simple. It's just like very graphic idea of showing dinosaur running next to this gyrosphere and people inside are panicking. But such a simple sketch, in the end, got converted into a fully realized like image, moving image on the big screen, which was this Allosaurus running next to this gyrosphere. But it was really important early in pre-production to have a guy like me who can come up with these ideas, which will eventually save a lot of time later on exploring these ideas on a higher level in 3D and stuff like that. So very simple, and it led to idea that was basically afterwards recreated on the big screen. Again, story beats, when you're doing those story beats, keyframes, there's no rule how detailed they need to be, because it really depends on how much time you have. For example, for these frames in Jurassic World, I had like very little time. I knew I had to be very effective, so I was just like using very like suggestive painting style just to kind of get the action right. But then again, within the same within the same task of making story beats, you can be a bit more refined. For example, this is another story beat which never made into the final movie, but it was good to kind of see how it will look like. And again, you see there's a little bit of photos, a little bit of painting, just to kind of portray the what's happening at the specific story moment. Again, another story beat, but you see the quality is so dramatically improved. It almost looks like a final shot from the movie. And this is exactly where you need to understand that in order to work on those, you kind of need to know everything, and depending on how much time you are coming up with with story beats and frames, some of them could be very rough, some of them could be very realistic and refined. Another frame from Aladdin, again, it's just one moment in the movie that is supposed to solve like story moments or like visual problems, like let's say how this cave looks like and stuff like that. Yeah, another frame from Overlord, basically showing like this the fleet of aircraft flying across the channel during the World War II. And again, some of them are very rough, some of them are very painterly. It really directionally depends on how much time you have and also who do you work with. Like some directors, they want very refined images. Some directors, they prefer to stay very loose, very sketchy, very rough. Another category is pitch illustration. Basically, this happens usually when movie is not even greenlit, right? Like they come to you and they go like, oh, we have this idea. We got to convince producers, right? And the reason why it is so important to know these different categories is that, or at least understand like who you're working with, because then you can kind of choose the strategy that will allow you to get your stuff approved as quick as possible. For example, in this case, I knew the director they will be talking with producers and some of them might literally all they want to see is the frame out of their movie, right? That's why, as you can see, the quality here, it almost looks like a still frame from a movie. And once you know that, it's so much easier to kind of see what tools do you have to kind of illustrate that level of finish in your final artwork. Again, another still frame, just showing one moment in the story, but it's quite refined, and it's basically showing you what your final movie would look like, which eventually helps this movie to get greenlit further down the line. Again, pitch illustration, it doesn't necessarily need to be all the time that refined, but it could be painterly, but obviously as long as it tells the story and it shows how your movie looks like, you're good. Character design, right? When you're starting out working on a movie, you will have a bunch of characters to be designed, and again, any kind of design task, you start very simple. For example, in case of this Iroh character for Ready Player One, I knew in order to these characters to move forward, I had to start very simple. So I started out with just very simple silhouette, and then once that silhouette got approved, I spent more time refining this character, like pushing it to the next level, and from there, like, I started doing some 3D, kind of refining this character and presenting it afterwards. Creature design is another common thing we do in pre-production. This is the artwork I did for Kong Skull Island, and again, as you can see, like, the variety of like level of final concept art is so dramatic, right? It goes from, like, Ready Player One was quite just drawing and sketching and then moving on to 3D. This is where like straight, like, jumping into 3D, showing different, like, basically like designing this whole character in 3D straight away. So it really depends what you're doing, but as long as you are showing and selling your idea, it doesn't matter what tools do you use. Like, same character design, just different options. Often they will ask you to do like a different takes on the same creature. Environment design. This is another thing we do is in pre-production as concept artists, is where they ask you to work on some environments, right? For example, this is an environment design I was working on for Ready Player One. And as you can see, like, often, like, there's no rule how you do it. Like, nobody's telling you, but I know exactly the way I need to approach certain things coming out of the brief I have. Like, for example, this is like, I knew it's going to be like a big arena, and I felt like, oh, maybe the best way to approach it would be just to draw things, right? So I did a bunch of different sketches, and then slowly, as the sketches got approved, I would move on to more realistic, more like refined look. This is still a bit stylized, but at least now it has the color. And then once I have more time, I was able to block out everything in 3D and basically rebuild this environment. And this is what I was presenting to my client. Prop design, right? It's vehicles, like any kind of transportation, weapons, any kind of devices that your characters use in the movie. Again, like, this is something I created for Ready Player One. It's like a take on Akira bike, which Artemis, the main character, is using in the film. And some drone design. Again, some of the design work you just do like in between steps to show how mechanisms work. So it's not only about the visuals. Most often, like, it really depends what the way your, like, prop works and stuff like that. For example, there was this drone, the delivery drone, and I thought it would have this like fans rotating, so that would allow it to move and stuff like that. And it basically, obviously, is heavily inspired by bugs, so it can grab the container and move it around and deliver to where you want it to be delivered. yeah, and this is after this, like, I basically, once this gets approved, I was able to kind of work it up and show my client the kind of more realistic look of it. Set design. This is not something I do very often. Set design is more, it's more architecture based, I guess. Like basically what happens in set, when they make movies, they build sets. For example, let's say if this was a design for Beauty and the Beast I made, someone had to build it physically. So this is where, like, yeah, for example, this is the set designs for Prometheus, and when you design those, you have to be like, you often using like SketchUp. You're trying to come up with something that will later on be ready to rebuild in real life. Again, not something I do that often. I actually probably never done it properly. But yeah, there are artists on set that kind of do everything in SketchUp, so it's all like real life scale, and then from there they take those prints and build those sets. Very fun job to do, but again, not my favorite, but it's good to know that there's something like that as well. So once you're done with pre-production, what happens next? There is production phase. It's basically when they shoot the movie, when they build all the sets and they invite all the actors and all the crew, and they're there with the cameras. So this is a very busy time. It's a very busy time for movie crew and not so busy time for concept artists. Yes, occasionally they will ask you, oh, could you paint over here and there, but most of the time they will let you do, like, basically, like, if you're working in the studio, you will probably go and work on a different project during the production time, because there's not much to do for concept artists. Post-production, so it's another phase. Once they've done with the shooting, they start like editing the movie, and they will have shots that will need some VFX work on that, right? But before they give it to VFX artists, they want concept artists to have a quick take on that, because in the end, the moment you move on to post-production and VFX work, it takes time. Like, for example, let's say if I was designing this frame to create the smoke by VFX guys, it will take quite significant time, and especially if you're trying to experiment with light and stuff like that, the easiest way is to give it to concept artists, so they can like quickly do a paint over. They will basically, you will use as a guide for your final shot in VFX, right? So that's why, like, often you will get like a very great scale, low poly, primitive scene. For example, this one was done for Ready Player One battle scene in the end of the movie, and what I was given was just like a grayscale model of this rock and with some characters in it. And obviously they wanted me to show how the final frame will look like, so I will have to use all my knowledge of lighting and composition, just basically to come up with all this like explosions and realistic lighting and stuff like that. And usually this goes to director. In that case it was Steven Spielberg. He will look at it and he'll go like, yeah, I like it, let's just make it animated. So then all the generalists and 3D guys, they have your frame as a reference, and then they spend another month or 2 or 3 just trying to make this all happen, right? To introduce the smoke and the explosions and all that stuff. Again, for a very similar job, but this time instead of having a 3D render, I had a shot from a movie. Obviously what was painted here was the dinosaurs on the lava. It wasn't there, and I think the big crack over there wasn't there as well. So they will give you a shot from a movie, and they want you to, again, do the same, pretty much the same thing. They want you to to paint your concept on top, so to give, like, to use it as a guide for VFX artists. And this is where it's important to understand who you're working with. Again, like, for example, I know this is gonna go to VFX artists, and that's why I need to be as realistic as possible, so they will have a guide or the reference that they can use to reproduce it. So if this was like Painterly, they will again have trouble understanding what exactly it is, but having this as a almost as a final frame, really help them to base their VFX work on your concept. Again, another example, for example, usually you get a shot like this with a lot of green screen, and director wants really to see what's going to happen here, right? So usually before VFX artists put all the hard work and months of work into these frames, concept artists will quickly block it out and basically show director how it's going to look like. And then once approved, it will move on to the VFX department, and they will do their magic. VFX concepts. So usually, again, in post-production, you will have tons of like visual effects work to be sorted out, right? For example, let's say for Avengers, I did this sequence of 3D printing of this character, and before, again, they would give it to VFX artists. Concept artists will have a go just to kind of quickly block out how this whole thing was going to look like, because in the end it's so much easier for us to do this because we paint, we draw, we still use 3D, but it's not moving an animated frame, and as a result it takes so way less time to come up with these ideas. Another frame, and often they will ask you to show the progression. For example, if you're doing this animated sequence of full of like visual effects, this is just a frame that explains the logic behind it, and this is more like cinematic frame of what actually is going on there. Yeah, and just a different angle on the same process. This is more towards the final kind of stage of this 3D printing that was supposed to happen in Avengers. Yeah, that pretty much summarizes all the steps. So again, to sum it up, we have 3 stages: pre-production, production, and post-production. There's not much work in production. Occasionally you might get some work in production, but it's more pre-production, and post-production is where like concept artists are like really, really busy trying to help to bring those ideas together, right? So, and also it's important, obviously now as you know what kind of work we do in films, it's important for you to understand that there are different ways you can get into industry. For example, one way is to work for VFX companies, right? For example, ILM, Framestore, Moving Picture, NPC, and there are a bunch of different other companies around the world, and they do visual effects for those films, right? But also on top of that, they have art departments, right? It's art department is where you have like a bunch of people, like it's like 6 to 10 to 20 people working on a movie. And what is good about working for studios like that is that you have constant flow of films, right? For example, if you worked for ILM, you would have like different movies every 3-4 months coming in, and it really keeps you busy and involved. And obviously being there as on a contract or permanently, you kind of secure your projects. You always will have projects to work on. Another way to work on this film project is work in our department on set. For example, let's say they're making an X movie, let's say Jurassic World, right? They hire a bunch of artists to work on this movie, and you basically relocate and you work on set with director, right? You have your own team, your art department team, and basically for the period of pre-production, you are there trying to kind of create visuals for this movie. You can still freelance, like occasionally you can be in our department on set and freelance, but it's a very rare case. Usually you have to be there. And obviously this means this is a per project work, right? For example, once they wrap up this movie, you will have to look for another work. And that's, I think, like could be very tricky in a way. But I think once you establish yourself, you will be just moving from a movie to another movie, and constantly having work, right? Okay, now as you know what concept artists for films do, it's time to really try to understand what exactly our process is, right? And it's actually very important to put this together in very simple categories again, just like as I did with types of work in film industry. Basically, your process always starts with a brief, right? You get the brief, you read the brief, you understand the brief, and then you start ideating, right? Which means like you start coming up with ideas. Using the brief, you're going online, you're doing your research and trying to kind of come up with some different like unique ideas. And then you need to visualize those ideas, because it doesn't matter how many good ideas you have if you don't know how to put it together. Uh, it becomes like a very useless idea. Once you put your ideas together, then you present them, and then you get the feedback, and then it just goes in cycles, right? Sometimes you go back to ideation, sometimes you get back to tools, sometimes you need to tweak your presentation and so on. So this is exactly the process we are going to follow in this course. So I will be briefing you, you're going back, trying to come up with these ideas, then you will be using tools, then you will be presenting it to me, and I will be giving you feedback again. So every week we'll have very similar pattern, very same pattern, I would say, and we're gonna use those steps, because this is where I think first you will practice it, as exactly as if you were working on the movie, and also it will help you to kind of find your weak spots, right? You will find the place you struggle with. Like for example, some artists, they struggle with feedback. They don't get the feedback right, and this is probably why you want to kind of improve that. Or some artists struggle with tools. For example, a lot of time beginner students, they don't know a lot of tools, and this is where you will see that this is your problem, or this is your weak spot, and then you will try to improve it. Or maybe you have problems with your idea. So at every stage during those 5 weeks, we will be trying to address all of them, and eventually it will help you not only to improve your weak spots, but also kind of put together all other aspects of your process. So let's start with the brief, the very first step, right? So usually when you get the brief, it's either from director or production designer or your supervisor or your art director. It comes in the verbal or written form, right? Or they send you some references, but basically you get it across by having by them just telling you what they want, right? They either send you an email or they send you a script or both. It doesn't matter, but you get this task that you need to do, right? So usually this is where a lot of artists, like depending on your experience, and even experienced artists, they have troubles with it. Before you start out straight away, try to understand the brief, right? Once you got the brief, read it. Like read it a couple of times. Try to see if there is anything missing. Like usually, like often, you go like, it's not very clear, but I'm gonna do it anyway. You do it, and then it comes back to you because you either got it wrong, or you have to redo it and stuff like that. In order to avoid it, try to ask questions. Once you get the brief, check if you have all the reference. Check if you fully understand it. There's nothing embarrassing about asking questions. It's actually really embarrassing when you get it wrong. It was obvious that you got it wrong, right? And don't be those guys. I did it when I did a lot in my career, but I learned how to deal with it. Just read the briefs very carefully, go through all the information, and once everything is clear, move on. Same with my briefs. If something is unclear, just flag it. Go like, hey Jama, I didn't get this, and I will be there to help you to clarify things, right? Once you get the brief, obviously the next step is very important. It's ideation, right? It's where you're coming with ideas, and you basically trying to do what you were asked to do, right? They give you a brief, and you go and you come back with a bunch of different ideas. So the first step for any idea would be research and inspiration, because it's almost impossible to come up with any ideas from a thin air, right? You cannot come up with ideas just by go like, oh, let's do this. You gotta learn about the subject you're working on. Especially with the movies, often like you work on so many different genres and so many different kind of ideas, so many different briefs. So most of the time, like in my career, I knew very little about the subject, right? For example, they throw at me, they go like, hey, we got to design dinosaurs, right? Even though I can draw dinosaurs, I don't know that much about dinosaurs. So I had to go and do my little research, uh, watch documentaries, read books, like go through magazines and all that stuff. It's a very, very important first step you gotta do. And again, if you can totally skip it, but it will come back to you. Just like with the brief, if you didn't get the brief right, it will come back to you. With ideation, if you didn't do your research or inspiration phase, it definitely would come back to you, and you will basically lose your time and you will go in a circle and start it all over again. So do your research and inspiration, and when you do your research and inspiration, I strongly advise you to go for books, because yeah, these days it kind of sounds like you can find anything you want online, right? Which is true, but imagine a book which was created by a person who spent maybe 10 years of their lifespan trying to put like everything nicely in one and condensate it into one book. So if you can find a book on that subject, that means you will save yourself like basically taking those 10 years of experience that person had, and you have it in a very condensed version in one book. So usually when I start out the project, I go and I look for books on the subject, and this is the way I'm trying to find out more about this project. Magazines, documentaries are great. Like you can go on YouTube, watch documentaries about the subject. So basically the bottom line, the more you know about this, the better the chances that you will produce a great work, right? Once you do your research and inspiration phase, you move on and start putting together reference, right? So we're gonna use PureRef for that. So I'm gonna open PureRef here for you, where I already started putting some references together. So first, like there are a few reasons why we will be using PureRef, and obviously one of them is that it's so simple to organize your references, right? All you do, you just copy paste your or drag and drop your images from internet, and then you can start moving them around. You can start like organizing them, making them same size. Something that is really annoying to do in Photoshop, and here it's so well implemented. You can like rotate, you can flip it, you can resize it, you can do all sort of stuff. It's very, very cool. So when I want to see your ideas, I want a PureRef file so I can open it on my screen and just go through whatever files you have, right? So what happened here, like, our brief would be working on this near future Earth, which with catastrophic climate changes. So I already started putting like different ideas, and also I can drop notes. Like there are some articles that I found on Wikipedia or some articles scattered around the internet, like just some notes with different ideas on life forms on this type of the world where the climate changed so dramatically. So it's super, super cool. And also what I like about PureRef is that it has this infinite canvas, right? Like you can keep dragging and dropping ideas without being worried about having everything on like separate layers and all that stuff. Like in Photoshop, it's just so painful. So make sure you get PureRef, and next time I want to see your ideas, I want them to be in PureRef. So now, how do you look and search for reference, right? Usually what I do, I break it down into 3 steps, right? First, I obviously I do my research. I go and I look for the real world examples, right? For example, let's say if I want to work on the world covered by water, obviously there are some areas in around the world where this is already happening, right? So I just need to go and find it. I need to go find it and just basically place it into my pure ref. So for example, I found this really nice ideas of like shipwrecks around the world, and this is something very interesting because when you think about Waterworld, it sounds like, oh, there are no trees and because there's no land, but maybe there are some like some land left somewhere, and basically you can see something like this. At least it's an interesting idea, you know, like when you're looking for ideas, don't restrict yourself, like try to put together, like try to explore as much as possible, and then afterwards you can filter it, right? The second step would be actually like trying to marry different ideas, which I call fusion, right? Where you take idea, for example, if I go to my Photoshop, right? Let's say you have one idea, and then you have another idea, and then you fuse them together, right, to produce the idea, right? So for example, this is your like real world examples of, like, let's say we're doing a desert image. Let me go over here. Yeah, for example, I was like looking at this ruins, which is something you would expect to see, right? Like for example, these are like somewhere in the Middle East. Let's say if we're working on the desert world where like all the cities are like covered by deserts and stuff like that. This is the real world example, which makes it believable. But then I started thinking, what if we like use something that you would normally wouldn't see in that environment, like let's say a Catholic church, right? Like you can replace it with this and put like a bunch of sand. That would be a very interesting image, right? Because normally, like let's say this thing in Moscow, right? You can take that one, put a like the desert level layer up to here, and that's what will make this idea unique, right? You kind of in a way trying to combine those two worlds. One is the believable world that you would normally see, but then you give it a very unusual take, and this what produces in the end a very interesting idea. Like for example, London Eye, you can do that, but obviously try to be not that obvious, right? Like if you take a Statue of Liberty and put it into desert, we've seen that a lot, right? Try to be creative, like do your research. That's the reason why we do those researches. We're trying to come up with like to push those ideas as much as we can, right? So, and also as you do those, you will start like, it's almost like a chain reaction. Once you find an image, for example, I found this image. Imagine this aircraft carrier, but not in the ocean, not on the water, but maybe it's in the sand, right? So you clearly you see something you would expect, but in a very unexpected way, and that's what makes it unique, right? For example, and then you move on. Like I have a bunch of articles that I'm putting together. So what's gonna happen this week, parallel to you, I will be putting and doing my research, and you will see my progress too, and obviously I will be there on Discords, like tracking your progress too. For example, this is an interesting image. Like when I found it, I felt like, oh man, imagine this if this was salt. So you probably, when the ocean dries out, like you will have like mountains of salt, right? So that could be a very interesting environment. So basically you can crop it like this. Imagine if the character was like very little, very small over here. That could create a very interesting idea. So basically when I'm looking at this, like I'm drawing those ideas in my mind, but I can also like copy this very quickly, right? Go back to Photoshop. And for example, I can quickly drop this idea, like let's say, let's create like a couple of humans here. So what happens if we place our camera here? Well, how does this world look like? It could be very interesting. Imagine these giant mountains of salt, and you have some like regular rock, and it's all dry. It's all like it's very hostile and stuff like that. That could be very, very cool. So when you like putting those references together, drop notes, right? Like drop notes, try to paint over, like you see, like I'm just dropping some random notes. Sometimes I can't even read it. It says like imagine if this was dry, right? Like when you have floods, you would have like this destroyed roads. But imagine there were floods, but now it all dried out, and you have this roads broken up. This is an interesting image, which I thought like could start introducing a layer of society problems when you have this hostile post-apocalyptic world, right? Like this was basically inspired by, let's say, when you have animals feeding, drinking water. In Africa there's like a huge lack of water, and when the rain water comes to this valleys, you have all the animals, lions, and everybody kind of gathering together and trying to drink the water. Imagine if something like this would happen in the world where there's like huge deficit of water. You will have all those gangsters and normal people just trying to kind of for a certain amount of time to have a peaceful moment to drink water. So it's all about the research. That's exactly what I want to you to spend time this week. Try to come up with these ideas. Again, like like a very simple image, but then I was just dropping in a what about if there was there was no water, right? So you probably see like this deserts covering this. Could be a very nice image and very nice part of our story. And then as you go, you find images like this. What happened if like ocean dried so much you can literally it became like a desert with the patches of water here and there. Maybe there's still a little bit of water, but it's so salty that it's useless and stuff like that. But this could create a very nice images that we can create afterwards, right? And for example, if you're working on this desert image, I strongly advise you to go and have a look at Aral Sea. It's basically this place in Turkmenistan where there used to be a huge ocean. It was an ocean, it was a big lake but the size of a sea. And then what happened in the 70s, they started redirecting the water to water the agricultural like fields of cotton and all that stuff. And what happened eventually, this like they redirected the rivers that were feeding this lake, this giant lake, and it pretty much dried out. This is what is left of it. And as you can see, I think this is the border showing what it used to be. So it used to be a huge like lake slash sea, but now it's gone because humans just did what we do, destroying the nature, right? And you can already see this real life images of ships like laying down on the ground with no sea around it. So that could be very, very cool. So those were two steps. First, you start looking for real world references, trying to find something believable. Then you start looking at something not related to that subject, so we can marry those two ideas and in the end create something unique. And as a third step, if you're stuck, if you don't have any ideas anymore, you can start looking what has been done before by other artists on the same subject. But I would strongly advise you to avoid doing that, because in this course we try to learn how to come up with ideas. And obviously there are times when you run out of ideas and you can still go and look at what other artists did. But even if you do that, try not to learn to look at the modern art. Try to go back in time. Try to find some masters, like go back to 70s, but back to 80s. Try to see what those people have done, right? And for example, if you look at the Dune concept art, you will probably find some desert planets and stuff like that. So yeah. Okay, let's move on. And when you actually like coming with those ideas, you going through this brainstorming phase, right? Which means, I already kind of explained it, but you putting those like keywords, you either listing them And you can see I'm doing that already here. Like, I'm just coming with this random interesting ideas. How about like religious movements? What's going to happen with this world? Like RLC plus aircraft carrier. Basically like fires. Usually like I make a list of different things like this. And then coming out of this keywords, I will start looking for images, right? Like I will look at religious movements and I go and find different like religious movements and I try to kind of inspire myself with those to come up with new ideas. Less is better. What does that mean? When I'm going to be reviewing your work, I strongly advise you to limit yourself. Like for example, if you're showing me ideas, let's say this was the first idea, this is the second idea, and maybe we have a third idea, right? Make sure you separate your ideas. What I really would love to avoid seeing is just this random set of references. You just need to kind of group your ideas. For example, I felt like this is a very strong idea, so I would put it separately, and as a result I will have 3 different ideas for my brief, right? And then you can keep the rest just so I can see where you came from. Actually do keep the rest because I want to kind of see the process you went through. But as a end idea presentation, I would love to see like at most 3 ideas. If you have 1, which is good, leave it as 1, right? More than 3, it just becomes so it's not efficient way of doing things, because remember, like when you're working in movies, most of the time people you're presenting your work to, they have a very limited time to work at your stuff. Like if you're working with Steven Spielberg, he has probably like 5 minutes of his time in a day to look at your stuff, and instead of throwing at him like a bunch of different like scattered ideas, you just go and say like, hey, I've got like 3 very distinctive ideas, and then the person could look at them and say, yeah, I like this one, let's move forward, right? So make sure you limit yourself. That's why I always say less is better. Let me show you an example from a movie I worked on, which was Ready Player One, and this was a brief on this sequence which never actually you never ended up being in the movie, but it kind of shows the process behind ideation, behind the whole thing. As an idea, as a brief, it was supposed to be like this floating station, space station in the space, and I felt like, well, instead of like just going regular space station in the space, I felt, wow, if it is a floating one, and again I was reading the brief very carefully, and if it floats, maybe I can make it more organic. So I started by looking at different references, and then I found this real life reference of a jellyfish, which has nothing to do obviously with the space station, right? But then I found this image, which kind of, I felt like if I change the scale of the jellyfish dramatically, it will actually make a lot of sense, and it could be a very good idea. So then I started doing my research and seeing if I can make my space station to look like a jellyfish. And actually, I was looking at comets, and they pretty much look like jellyfish, right? It has like this long tail which kind of resembles the jellyfish tail, stuff like that. And this is where I felt like, wow, I should give it a go, right? Even though it sounds crazy, why would you have this organic space station? But guys, it's a sci-fi movie, you can do anything you want. But obviously then I have to go deeper and try to find, for example, it was supposed to have trains departing from that station, and I felt, how, okay, I can understand the overall shape, how do I make it work with as a train station? So then I was looking at this crazy roller coaster and with the rails, and also I was looking at space shuttle being launched, and it kind of was, wow, what if we like have actually trains to travel, and basically like I think this was the image that inspired me in a way, And again, I was looking at old masters and I felt like, wow, we can have this trains traveling not on a straight line, but uh, on top of an organic line. It's almost like those uh, those railways. They could be like curved and stuff like that, just like here, right? So then I was looking for more reference from different artists, and again, like I said, I try to go back, like instead of like trying to go on ArtStation and find something that's similar to what I'm doing, which is there's nothing wrong with doing that, but obviously I prefer to go to source material, go and find the inspiration those guys were inspired by, and then the more you can go towards the source of this material, the better chances that you can come up with something cool. So some paintings by John Harris, and again, like I was imagining, this is the way I can structure my idea, right? And then it comes down to the next phase, right, which is tools. Yeah, you can have ideas, but obviously everybody has ideas, but not everybody is working as a concept artist for films, because you need to know your tools, right? And often people ask me, well, like, as a concept artist working for films, what tools do you need to know? I kind of go like, well, you need to know everything, because again, as I was showing at the beginning of this lecture, the diversity of work is so wide, right? Like, there's so many things you do. That's why it's important to be able to know 2D, know 3D, and kind of know how to mix them together. So on this specific example, like I started out just like I found a nice photo of nebulas which looked like jellyfish formations, and then I would just put a spaceship. That gave me a scale, right? And then I was like, wow, this actually could work. And then I started like roughing out very quick ideas with very simple drawings, just black and white sketches, just showing the idea of this jellyfish stations. And this one looks like, oh well, that's jellyfish, like jellyfish, and you don't really know what it is, but once you show the close-up of all the spaceships docking with this jellyfish, you kind of know, wow, now I know the scale. And I use the idea of the roller coaster and trains. It basically, like, every tentacle of this jellyfish is this railway, the organic, and everything is moving, and this is how those trains travel. Is it a crazy idea? It is, but this is why you get hired, so you want to show something that we've never seen before. Then obviously, in order to sell, like to kind of wrap up this idea in my mind, I had to do this diagram just to understand, and I would drop this idea. So this is the main station, this is the tail mega city. It's basically the structure that was inspired by John Harris's drawings, paintings, and then these are the railways where the trains are traveling from by. And now it was time to kind of, yeah, this is cool, but could you make it look more realistic? How does it look? So I started like blocking it out in 3D code just to kind of show that those structures are stacked up on top of each other. Yeah, and then I did this jellyfish elements just to kind of trying to see how this thing will look like. And then I did a bunch of renders, basically showing this idea that these are like giant mega, almost like mega floating space cities, right, floating around. And that was basically enough to sell this idea. I was able to put all that together and present my idea. So that would be the next step, where you're presenting your ideas. So with presenting your ideas, again, I always follow one rule, especially for films. This could sound very different if you're working in games, but in films, again, just because the amount of time you can get from art directors, from special visual effects supervisors, production designers, and directors, you don't have that much time. It needs to be very, very kind of distinctive. So less is always better. It's better to make like two strong ideas, and it's better to have them very distinctive rather than a variation on the same idea. So when I will be looking at your work, I will be make sure present less, but make sure all the ideas that you present are very distinctive from each other. And then obviously you will get a feedback, which obviously I will give it live, and you will understand how to work with it. And I will give you ideas about how to deal with the feedback and see how are you doing with that. So yeah, let's go back again to the beginning of this chapter where we started from. So the idea of this week, I wanted you to get familiar with the industry first. Even if you worked in the industry, sometimes people don't really understand where they are exactly and what they want. As long as you know where you are and where you want to go, it would be always easier for you to get to that goal. Otherwise, you will be just randomly doing this and that and never kind of moving forward towards your goal. So first, know where you are, and you now know where you want to be. And during these 5 weeks, I will be there to help you to understand and to kind of really trying to focus yourself on getting up, like updating you, like upgrading you and leveling up your skills in as a concept artist for films. And then the second part was a process. This is a very universal process. It's not something you only apply to art. You do it in your daily life. You get briefed, you get ideas, you use the tools you present, and you get the feedback. This was very important to break it down like this, because now I will be very specific and tell you exactly where you struggle. You may be struggling at everything, which is totally normal. That's why you taking this course. I believe all of the students are here just because you want to grow. That's why my job is to identify and show you where you're struggling, and then we will slowly be working on closing the gap. And even when the course is wrapped up, you will have time and you will know exactly what you're dealing with, right? So as a part of homework for this week, you will have your brief, which is near future. We have a catastrophic climate changes and humanity is at the edge of extinction, right? There's no countries or governments. It's basically total chaos, and like basically humanity and people are trying to survive in these little pockets scattered all around the world. So basically, coming out of the world you're working on, and beginners work on water world, intermediate on desert, and professionals on snow world, I want you to do the following. I want you to basically go through the same process described in this chapter, in this lecture. First, do your research. Then put all your references in PureRef file. Make sure you group your ideas when you're coming to me, like at most free ideas, and try to make them as distinctive as possible. Then you can use any tools to visualize your ideas, right? You can do quick sketches, you can do like a 3D, you can do Photobash. There are no rules at the moment. I want to see your range. I want to see what you're capable of doing. I want to see where you struggle, so we can build a strategy in following weeks where I will be exactly going through the same process, and each time we will be dealing with different tasks, and each time you will practice and basically improve your skills in the very aspect of the same process, right? Make sure you name your files, because we're just starting out. I don't know everybody, so once you do the artwork, just put somewhere, like just sign it basically. Instead of signature, just drop your name, like let's say Chris something, and then I will know exactly who did the artwork. All right, that's pretty much it. I'm so excited to see what you guys can come up with, and we will be talking on Discord, and we will be seeing each other at the end of this week at the feedback session. Cool.